It's just a very weird way to approach the story, I guess. What's up, my fellow headbangers? I'm Courtney, aka The Versatile Virgo, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I run a metal lifestyle blog, theversatilevirgo.com, where I help heavy music lovers like myself literally put the music back into their lives, usually in the form of musically inspired recipes, outfits, and of course things like interviews and reviews as well. So if that's something that interests you, make sure to check it out. I've linked it in the description below. When you think of the term rock star, I'm sure there's probably a few different names that come to mind, and for me, one of those names is definitely Tommy Lee. At least when it comes to the traditional rock star persona. And while I may have been very young in the 90s, I can definitely remember Tommy Lee and Pamela Anderson's names being everywhere. Of course, they became known for much more than just music, film, and TV when their infamous sex tape was stolen from their home in 1995 and released to the public. The events that took place during that scandal are being revisited in the new Hulu series Pam and Tommy. So let me just tell you, I've been hesitant to watch this at all because I know how Hollywood can be when they try to depict stories like this. I know recently we've been seeing a lot of these type of scandals being revisited in series like this, and they're being told from a different perspective. But given that this is about probably the most infamous celebrity sex tape of all time, I expected this to have a lot of sexually explicit filler in it, and that's just not something I'm generally interested in. And I'm not really somebody that's a prude. I can definitely sit through things like that, but again, Hollywood just has a way sometimes of taking these things way too far that it almost makes it uncomfortable to watch. Not to mention that Pam and Tommy themselves haven't really been involved with this series. They didn't give any consent or anything like that, so it's not like this is a docu-series per se. So I also didn't really have much interest to watch it because it's not like it's going to give me any inside perspective from their point of view. And even if it is accurate, at least in some areas, I do still expect it to be dressed up a bit, if you know what I mean. And because Pam and Tommy themselves aren't actually involved, producers had to go to outside sources to make this series, which includes a 2014 Rolling Stone article titled Pam and Tommy, the untold story of the world's most infamous sex tape. But since I've been trying to take things a little bit easier, since my shoulder is still recovering, I've been watching Hulu a little bit more than I usually do, and I've definitely been burning through my favorite garbage reality TV, and I'm running out of things to watch. So this week, I decided to give the first 5 episodes of Pam and Tommy a shot. By the way, I also went into this series kind of blindly. I didn't watch any commercials or trailers for it really, other than those 10-second teasers that Hulu's been putting out that are just kind of showing that there's a series about Pam and Tommy's infamous tape. So I really didn't know if this was going to be told from like a historically accurate perspective, or if it was just going to take the circumstances of that event and obviously pepper them up for Hollywood standards like some movies do. And when I watched the first 4 episodes, I actually didn't know that Pam and Tommy didn't have any involvement in this. Like I said, I just kind of blindly put it on. And then after I watched the first 4, before I got into episode 5, I wanted to know, how true is this stuff? Did any of this actually happen? What did they think of it? And after I've watched the first 5 episodes, I really don't know what to think. So this video is going to be a review of the first 5 episodes of Pam and Tommy. I won't call it a recap per se, but there will definitely be some spoilers peppered in here throughout so I can tell you my thoughts. So spoiler alert. I'll actually start with the factual portion of this first. So apparently parts of this series are supposed to be historically accurate as to how they took place, but obviously obviously, as Hollywood always does, it is dressed up a little bit. Part of this series is, I guess, semi-accurate, at least in terms of the basic events that took place. For example, like the way Rand Gauthier's character, which is played by Seth Rogen, actually steals the infamous tape. When I was watching the series, I thought this couldn't have been how it actually took place, but according to his own words, based on what he's said in interviews and things like that, that is actually, I guess, how the tape was stolen. Which, I know this was the mid-90s, but it's still amazing to think how thin that veil was between celebrities and I guess something like this happening even in the mid-90s, even for somebody like Pam and Tommy. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But of course, there are also areas of this series that are not accurate, and definitely there are areas of the couple's lives that are placed into separate areas of the story, so they will make just that a more dramatic story. The most bothersome aspect of this to me is the storyline surrounding Pamela Anderson's pregnancy in the first 5 episodes. Well, it's actually, I think, episodes like 2 through 5 where this really happens, and definitely primarily in 3 through 5 where the pregnancy becomes more of the storyline. But essentially, the idea behind this part of the story is that when the tape starts being distributed to the public and Pam and Tommy find out about it, the stress of that causes her to miscarry. And unfortunately, that is something that Pamela Anderson did deal with in her real life and in her real life with Tommy. But apparently that actually happened months prior to the tape being stolen. So this aspect was just for the actual series. I just think that that particular part of the story is something that was done in really poor taste. I'm sure that Pam and Tommy don't want to be involved with this because, one, I'm sure they don't want to be reliving this either. They also do have 2 children together, so I'm sure this probably isn't fun for their children either, even though that their kids are older now. And when you have a sensitive topic like that and you're talking about a very real person, and it's not like she's 80 years old, it's not like this happened 60 years ago, even if it did, I think that that's probably something that would still be very painful. And I don't know, I just don't agree with that particular aspect being included just to pepper up a story. And again, when I first started this series, I actually didn't know what to expect, but I anticipated this being told from a different perspective from the way the story's been told, at least on Pamela Anderson's side of things, for the last 20 some years. And when this series first starts, episode 1 actually opens with Pamela Anderson on Jay Leno, and he's interviewing her about the infamous tape now that it's out. She's obviously uncomfortable, and he's asking her questions about the exposure this tape must have given her career. So right off the bat, the show definitely does start setting us up for at least part of what I was anticipating. One of the ideas that this series definitely does push is the fact that Pamela Anderson definitely did get the brunt of this scandal, even though she might not have necessarily been the target. The consequences of the tape being released are supposedly because Tommy Lee did not pay Rand Gauthier, who was a contractor working at his house, and not only did he refuse to pay him, but I guess Rand left without his tools, and when he went back to get them, Tommy would not allow him to take his tools, even sticking a gun in his face whenever he tries to do so. I'm not going to go into all the details, but there's a scene that shows how traumatic this event was for Seth Rogen's character, and it definitely humanizes it. It makes it make sense of, oh, this is definitely why he would want to screw over this guy. But the series also shows how even prior to this tape being released, Pamela Anderson was still obviously being over-sexualized and having a hard time being taken seriously as an actress. At least that's the way the series tells the story. Something I definitely agree with, by the way, but again, because Pamela Anderson herself hasn't commented on this series and these things within the series, I'm not going to speculate on those things, but that's just personally how I see things for women like Pamela Anderson. And it sucks. Something that this series does really well is showing how on one end of things, yes, people in general were over-sexualizing Pamela Anderson, painting her in a certain type of light just based on the way she looked. And on the other side of things, Hollywood behind the scenes is also doing this to her, but they get a pass because it's Hollywood. With that being said, the show is calling out Hollywood for exploiting Pamela Anderson while it does exactly that, exploiting Pamela Anderson. The series quite literally feels like it goes from one scene where they're saying, see how wrong this is to do to somebody, and then in the next scene they do exactly that. And it's very uncomfortable as the viewer. It also, as an audience member, kind of feels insulting. Like, do you think people watching this are that stupid? If you've seen the movie The Interview that Seth Rogen did with James Franco some years back, and it had a lot of controversy surrounding it, this series actually gave me the same kind of vibe, at least in the first 5 episodes throughout, that I got from that movie. Which sucks because there are parts of this series, like I said, that I do like, but the overall tone of it is just very weird. So let's talk more about what I did like first. The relationship dynamic between Pam and Tommy's characters is so sweet. The series shows the relationship starting off as this kind of whirlwind romance that they get swept up in, and it almost kind of feels very naive in the beginning. There's not like any real world bad stuff they're dealing with yet, and it all happens kind of very quickly. Both of these actors did a really great job in these roles, and again, that is Sebastian Stan playing Tommy Lee and Lily James playing Pamela Anderson. Also, whoever did the wardrobe and hair and makeup, and really the art department too, for this series deserves an award as far as I'm concerned, especially the hair and makeup. I cannot get over how much Pamela Anderson's character looks like her. And if you look at the actress who plays her, I just think that the transformation is amazing. Same thing with Tommy Lee's character. As I slightly started mentioning earlier, in episode 1, Tommy Lee is depicted as a real jerk. He fires Rand, a contractor at his home, without paying him, refuses to give him his tools back, and even sticks a gun in his face when Rand tries to get them. In episode 2, we get this other side of Tommy, which is the wild rock star persona, and a guy who quite literally thinks with his, you know, something we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So he goes from being this kind of sex-obsessed rock star to being absolutely infatuated with Pamela Anderson. And then by the time we get to episode 3, his character has evolved more, as well as the relationship. It's still very naive. Tommy is depicted as somebody very naive, just totally not in touch with reality and how things should be handled in the real world. But there's this part to their relationship starting in episode 3, and it might even start in episode 2, where Tommy starts to really be shown as this supportive partner. And honestly, if that's how their relationship was, it makes you kind of sad that they're not together now. And I'm not a huge like Pam and Tommy fan by any means, but it was done really well in this series to really kind of make you root for them and their relationship, even though we all know how it plays out. The series also goes as far to show what's going on behind the scenes with Tommy Lee as well, again, allegedly, obviously, but they kind of show how grunge at the time is moving in, and that's becoming what's cool, while Tommy and Motley Crue and hair metal are kind of on the outs a little bit, and he's starting to deal with this thought process of, am I washed up now? And he's having a hard time dealing with that as well, amidst all the things going on with the tape. So I will say this show does give a lot of great examples of how these things affect the people behind the scenes, and kind of like that idea of you never really know what's going on behind closed doors, and this is why you shouldn't be shitty towards people. that kind of idea. I personally, looking at this just from the character in the show perspective, went from hating Tommy Lee in episode 1 to really rooting for him by the end of episode 3. And again, who knows the accuracy of their actual personality types and things like that, but I thought they did do a decent job of humanizing him, especially after episodes 1 and 2, where I really wasn't sure if they were making fun of Pam and Tommy or where they were trying to go with this. And that kind of leads me into what I didn't like about this series, although I guess I've been kind of doing that back and forth throughout this video. The first 2 episodes for me continuously switched from being boring and downright absurd. There was kind of no in between. As I expected, there's definitely a lot of sexually explicit content and definitely a lot of sexually explicit filler throughout the first 5 episodes. But there's times when the series goes out of its way, it feels like, to make it that uncomfortable. It's just really weird. For example, in episode 2, there's this scene where after Pam and Tommy first meet, they're like staring at each other like pieces of meat, and the dialogue is just so bizarre. Granted, it is supposed to be after they take some type of club drug or whatever, but it's just delivered so weird. The scene is weird that, again, it almost kind of felt like I wasn't sure if they were making fun of Pam and Tommy in this scene or what. If they were trying to communicate that it was just this naive romance, it definitely got lost in that scene. And as I kind of already mentioned a little bit earlier, in episode 2, there is this scene where Tommy is quite literally talking to his and said appendage is trying to convince him to not marry Pamela Anderson. But Tommy does it anyways because I guess he was thinking with his heart. Aww. So anyway, they go out of their way to give this scene as many close-ups of the actors as possible. And I mean literally from every angle. And it's kind of like, you know, when you did it the first 2-3 times, it's like, oh, haha, whatever, I guess. But when you do it so many times, it just makes it not funny at all. And I think the thing that you were trying to accomplish with doing that, again, gets lost. Like, for such an adult geared show, it's so bizarre. Sometimes there are parts where it almost feels like it was written, directed, and edited by a teenage boy. And again, this is all the meanwhile that they're trying to prove the point of Hollywood sexually exploiting Pamela Anderson in every way they could, pretty much. Yet, at the same time, that's exactly what this series does. Like in the scene in season 2 that I was just talking about. It literally went from being supportive of Pamela Anderson to showing a scene where you kind of make her look dumb. And not in an, oh, we all make stupid mistakes kind of way. It just kind of feels exploitative. It's just a very weird way to approach the story, I guess. Another point that I think this series is trying to drive home is the idea of internet regulations. Now, I don't know for sure, and I might be reaching here a little bit, but I think the reason that this particular topic and this particular story of Pam and Tommy is being chosen for this series is because it happened at such a weird time. Simply because this show does a great job of showing how, because this happened at such a strange time where the internet was coming up and there really were no regulations around it then, and people were just sort of starting to understand how it worked. Unfortunately, that's part of the reason of why it exploded the way that it did. The safeguards in place for something like this happening and being distributed weren't applicable to Pam and Tommy's case because it had gotten to a point where it had just gotten out of control and there was no stopping it. As does everything on the internet. There's so many times throughout this series where they're like, whoa, what's a phone book? And whoa, what's the internet? So I thought that was kind of funny, and I do like that part of this series. And at the same time, I also think it is really useful in this series if that's the point that they're trying to communicate, because it kind of goes from showing like, look how ridiculous it is to think like we didn't think the internet would be what it was, and oh, times were so different. But are they really that different? And with that idea comes the thought of, if this could happen to somebody like Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee, this could happen to anybody. After all, despite the fact that they were and are celebrities, this was still a private tape stolen from somebody's private home. And if I were them, I would have definitely felt pretty helpless in this situation. There's even a point, I think it's in episode 5, where they're kind of going back and forth on what they should do next. And Pamela Anderson's character thinks that they should be pushing the legal route, but of course she's in a room full of men that are lawyers and Tommy Lee, and everybody's telling her that's not what we should do. So of course they decide to file a lawsuit, which even furthers this news story, makes it even bigger news, and causes even more repercussions for Pamela Anderson. I love that this series so many times, especially between episodes 3 and 5, where they're trying to sell the tape, they kind of keep showing all these corporate bigwigs in every area and every industry, including porn and top bigwigs in Hollywood and journalists, and everybody's telling the people that want to sell this story, well, there's no story yet, until Pam and Tommy eventually try to sue. It's just crazy if you think about it. Overall, if you can get past episodes 1 and 2, I do think this series is decent. It's something that I'm writing all of you here on YouTube about, but I definitely probably wouldn't be writing home about it. Let's just say that. I also would definitely only be watching this series for entertainment purposes and not really for the factual truth behind their version of what happened, I guess. And again, that's just because unless it's confirmed by Pamela Anderson or Tommy Lee, I'm just not gonna take it as fact, since everything is so sensationalized, including this series. It definitely is entertaining. I just really hope that they don't do an episode 2 2.0, because I definitely won't be watching it if that's the case. Stick to the story, get rid of the crazy excess filler. And also just keep in mind, if you're going to watch this, that obviously there is a lot of sexually explicit content, and sometimes it's done in a gross way, like the close-ups of Tommy Lee's, you know. Again, there's lots of sex, drugs, and some rock and roll. Not as much as I would like to hear in this soundtrack, but this series does have a great soundtrack, so if that's a reason you'd be into watching this, then I'd recommend checking it out for that purpose, especially if you're a 90s lover like myself. Alanis Morissette's in here, 9 Inch Nails, and all kind of other good stuff. You can watch episodes 1 through 5 of Pam and Tommy on Hulu, and apparently there's new episodes every Wednesday. I'm not sure how many episodes there are left in this series, but if you'd like me to do a review for the remaining episodes, or you'd like to see other reviews like this, then definitely let me know in the comments section below. And if you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel, because I have even more heavy music related videos on the way. Thanks for watching this, everybody, and stay heavy.